Burgess, thank you very much. Always a delight to be back in the Rules Committee. We could do what the gentleman from Arizona invites us to do, but it would be completely unconstitutional. The last president tried to include a citizenship question on the decennial census in 2020 and to count only U.S. citizens in the census, as this legislation would do, and it failed for completely obvious reasons. Section 2 of the 14th Amendment states that apportionment of seats in the House is based on account of, quote, the whole number of persons in each state, unquote, persons being the all-encompassing category larger than that of citizens or voters. When the framers wanted to impose a citizenship requirement, they sure knew how to do it. For example, when they said that the president must be a born U.S. citizen and not a naturalized citizen. Some people think that was because Thomas Jefferson was moving to block Alexander Hamilton from running for president. But in any event, it's right in the Constitution, just like it says we as members of the House, we have to be U.S. citizens for at least 7 years, which is why if you've been naturalized in the last 3 or 4 years, you can't do it. The Supreme Court has been perfectly clear about this and made this point emphatically in a unanimous 2016 decision called Evanwell versus Abbott. And like this legislation itself, Evanwell involved a challenge to congressional apportionment based on a total count of the entire population instead of just a count of the voter population. But Justice Ginsburg held for the unanimous court that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, quote, retained total population as the congressional apportionment base. She cited the speech made by Senator Jacob Howard upon introduction of Section 2 of the 14th Amendment. Quote, he said, the basis of representation is numbers. The committee adopted numbers as the most just and satisfactory basis, and this is the principle upon which the Constitution itself was originally framed, that the basis of representation should depend upon numbers. And such, I think, after all, is the safest and most secure principle upon which the government can rest. Numbers, not voters. Numbers, not property. This is the theory of our Constitution. Justice Ginsburg included lots of decisive legislative authority like this, including the floor statement of Representative James Blaine, who stated that, quote, no one will deny that population is the true basis of representation. For women, children, and other non-voting classes may have as vital an interest in the legislation of the country as those who actually deposit the ballot. And therefore, they all must be counted. For all of you constitutional textualists out there, the plain reading of the text is clear. Clear as day. For all of you constitutional originalists, the original purposes of the passage of the 14th Amendment have been carefully articulated and revisited repeatedly by the Supreme Court and never rebutted by any contrary legislative authority. For all of you members who like to follow precedent, every apportionment since 1790 has included every single person residing in the United States, not just those lucky enough to be given the right to vote. As the Evanwell Court noted, the 14th Amendment contemplates that representatives serve all residents, not just those eligible to vote. You don't enforce the 14th Amendment under Section 5 by violating the terms of the constitutional amendment. The meaning is indisputable, a point which settles this for anyone who wants to follow the Constitution's text and original public meaning in all cases, not just when the text favors our desired policy outcome. I remember the admonition from the former chairman of this committee, the gentleman from Oklahoma, who would tell us that we should get our work done and not waste time on legislation that will never pass the Senate, never get signed by the president, and certainly never be approved by the Supreme Court. This bill is an affront to the great radical Republicans who wrote the original Constitution and the 14th Amendment, which has always made persons, not voters, the basis for reapportionment. The census is essential to democracy, just as the framers endorsed Tom Paine's common sense. They endorsed a common census. This bill would destroy the accuracy of the census, which may have something to do with its real legislative motivation. In the 2010 census, the undercount of Hispanic U.S. citizens was 1.4%, but in 2020, that number grew to 5%. Many observers credit that 300% plus jump to the last administration's attempt to add a citizenship question to the census and all of the publicity and rumor surrounding that attempt. The addition of a question about citizenship will deter many immigrants not only the undocumented, but persons with green cards and people who are U.S. citizens from completing the census. Many non-citizen immigrants who are seeking asylum or are refugees will avoid responding because of uncertainty over their status and fear of arbitrary law enforcement action. Extensive research over the last decade shows that many residents wrongly believe the Census Bureau shares personal responses with other agencies. They don't. Federal law prohibits the sharing of information in this way, but that worry has prevented many people from answering questions about immigration status or responding to the census at all. Census data guide the allocation of $2.8 trillion each year in federal assistance to states, localities, and families for a broad range of vital services. An inaccurate census would skew the fair distribution of federal resources for the next decade and deprive many cities and towns in places like Texas and California of needed resources for everything from roads to hospitals and veterans care. I strongly oppose this legislation, Mr. Chairman, which dishonors and violates our Constitution and the values of our nation. I yield back.